Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Corey Hess. So Corey is associated with Zen, with his own podcast, various kinds of body work, craniosacral work, various other kinds of body work he can tell us about. So Corey, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your personal journey. How did you get interested in the work you do now and specifically the body within that?
Well, I guess it was desperation. Like many people, I hit sort of a wall at a certain point in my life, and I was desperate to discover a new way of being in my life. I was a normal kid in the Midwest, living in the woods and walking around the woods, trying to discover what was real about this life. And then when I was growing up, I had certain experiences in sports that I saw different ways of being and different freedoms that I found in my daily life were pretty lacking. So these sort of flow states started to happen for me in athletics. And but then continuing through, growing up, I found that my experience of reality was pretty troubled. I had sort of a block going against the flow, I felt like, with my body and my experience of moving through space. And that culminated in college. I sort of had this weird seizing up of my hip while taking this ballet class in college in Missoula, Montana. Mm-hmm. And that took me to a Rolfer, a structural integrator, my good friend Marilyn Beach, and that was really transformative. But what I did along with that, I went to this evening where she was teaching something called non-directed body movement, and that was a process where you kind of just let your body open itself up. If it had the chance, it would start to unwind old trauma. And I saw within that process that, there's so much going on here, and I could dive into this forever. And I realized I had a lot of going on in there, a lot of trauma. And that
going back to this seizing up of the body, because I want to highlight this to listeners, because I've heard this time and time again that sometimes people are fairly disembodied or ignoring that area of their life, and the body just rebels. Yeah, right. Something happens that they just can't. I've heard people say, my jaw locked, and I couldn't eat, or I just couldn't walk, or really serious things happen where the body's just screaming at people to start paying attention to that domain.
Yeah, that was me. So yeah, I I was a pretty sensitive, pretty desperate guy, and I really saw that, this is a huge process that I could begin to unfold, and so I kind of I was looking for ways to do that. And at a certain point I went to an acupuncturist, and she told me I needed to do this internal sort of energy work. And for me, I thought, well, who's the best at that? And I thought it would be a Zen person. And I wrote Gary Snyder, and Gary Snyder's a famous writer.
Yep, poet.
And Gary, I said, well, at this point also, I thought I wanted to be some kind of poet. And I said, well, Gary, I'd like to go train in Japan, and I'd like to actually have something to write about at some point in my life. I'd like to find my own internal harmony and then be able to express it. And Gary said, wait, don't go to Japan yet. Go to this place on Whidbey Island, which is where I live now.
That's in the States, or?
That's in the States. It's in Washington State, north of Seattle.
We have a Whidbey in the UK too. It's a seaside resort where people get really drunk.
Well, this is more like hippie stone. You know what I mean? That's more the vibe here.
Okay, got it. Whitby Island. I've not heard of that. Okay, good to learn. Okay, so you went to a monastery there. What was there?
Yeah, I went to there was a little satellite monastery here, and I had all these expectations about Zen, and I thought, well, everyone will be so peaceful, and everyone will be just smiling, and it will be beautiful, and it was beautiful. But actually, when I arrived, the head monk was so different than what I had imagined.
Yeah.
And he was very sharp and very powerful in a way that the way he dealt with people was so impressive to me, but also not in this sort of nice way that I had expected.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh, this guy's kind of arrogant, and what's going on here? And so I said, well, forget this, this practice with this arrogant guy. I'm going to run off and go live my life and go enjoy my life. And so I left that, and I went traveling to different parts. I went to Cuba and around the world a little bit. And I realized that I couldn't really be in my skin. I couldn't be happy in my skin. And so I realized, I really do have to go and find this internal way of dealing with reality before I can enjoy my outward reality. So that really hit me, and I decided to somehow, when I came back from traveling, I decided, I'll try to go back to this Zen place. And when I went back, the Roshi was there from Japan, and I arrived, and I went to a Taisho, and it's totally like, it's totally crazy. It's absurd. The Roshi's like this wild, yelling, macho maniac, you're there and you're just kind of half crapping your pants the whole time,
And to jump in, people might not realize this about Zen. Like, I've had a couple of fierce Zen teachers, and, Zen's kind of samurai kind of Buddhism. It can be pretty fierce. It can be pretty direct. It can be pretty yang. It can have a sense of humor as a saving grace too, right? But like, people might have an image of the sort of serene Buddha. And then, monasteries are often, I've spent a bit of time in a monastery in the UK, and they're often full of politics and maybe, human imperfections almost like turned up to the max under the magnifying glass of communal mindfulness, right? So like, people may have some weird impressions about what Zen is or a monastery might be like.
It's an oven that you cook in, and you got, it's hot in there. And, for me, I saw the Roshi, and then he invited me to tea. And so, which was a pretty great opportunity, but maybe they knew, this kind of weird guy, intense guy, maybe he's a candidate for training. Okay. And so I went to tea with the Roshi, and, I'm sitting there, and I was so shocked by his physical presence. His way of moving was so unknown to me and so powerful. I had, kind of zero understanding of it. And this is something I always want to say about, like, if it's a real Zen teacher, they move really beautifully, like not in this theatrical way, but they're moving so powerfully. And seeing that was a big shakeup for me. I thought, this is a person who's really actualizing a way of being through the world that I was looking for. And yet at the same time, I thought, no way, I'm not going to go train with this guy. This is insane. I want to go, chase girls and go to the bar, whatever, And but I asked him, I said, well, why would someone like me go and train in the monastery in Japan? And he looked at me and he said, ooh, what do you think? And I kind of said, well, I think it's got to depend on the person. And, he said, in his deep voice, no, it's to realize why you were born. And for me, I had zero understanding of how to interact with that question. And it just hit me. And So I was allowed to stay for the rest of the retreat. And it was like 4 more days. I sat in one of these chairs with your knees, and I'm just a kind of boiling over pressure cooker, suffering. And the end of the week there, I had a big kind of opening, a carrot kind of, we say sort of this carrot to keep you going. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, this is the depth of possibility of the mind here. And so deep Zazen was sort of revealed to me at that point. And then quickly, so later in the fall, I was sort of running around. I wasn't committing to this monastery. It was, I just had 1 foot out, 1 foot in, and didn't want to go to Japan. I was really wishy-washy. And then day 6 of the retreat on Whidbey was 9/11. And which is obviously the World Trade Center being crashed into with airplane,
Yeah.
And so that for me said, oh, I've got to go and discover something I need to find some answers. I need to go and do some training. I had also been to Japan before as a chaperone for this group. They brought me along to Japan, and I visited the monastery, and it was very difficult for me. It was very strange. And, part of you is always thinking, there are a lot of Westerners there, a lot of foreigners. Part of me was thinking, are these just yuppies playing dress up? You kind of have that feeling. And then on the other hand, you have this, oh, this is so profound what's happening here. And when I was there for that short time before I actually committed, I saw, oh, it had profoundly hit me, and I realized this was something that I could do for a long time. Anyway, that's how I started.
Wow. Okay. And where did the body work come in? So this is this kind of Zen beginnings. Tell us about the body work.
Well, I will say in Zen, okay, in this Rinzai style. So I would say the body work, short answer, the body work is a way to communicate this healing from within that's done in Rinzai Zen. For me, that's my style of communicating that. But when I first went to the monastery, sitting all those hours, trying to do the form there, which is very difficult. You're up at 3, you're going to bed at 11, you're sitting a lot, 5 to 18 hours a day, very physically difficult. And I went to the Roshi at one point and I said, what do you want from me here? This is so hard. And he said, I want you to get into your body right now. And so for me, that became my process. I just learned to slowly get in line, get in the flow of my body. That was my practice for years, and still my practice, but that was my real gateway into, I was, kind of, like you said, dissociated in a way from my body, and to begin to get into that, then you see, oh, there's this huge ocean of flow, of embodiment, of this river of power coming through you if you can dive into that. And so for me, over and over, the process is you see people who have really trained in Zen, they're so incredibly in their bodies. The whole practice is this: you're getting out of your head and you're getting more deeply into your physical body, and jiving with that, melding with that. And then once one has a really deep experience, like we call Kensho or Satori, or then the whole practice is about how can I walk around with that experience and actually offer something to the world through it. There are a lot of people who've had a lot of deep experiences, and they may be very brilliant people, but there's a part of them that is not really carrying that around or embodying it, or so you kind of don't feel the same thing from them. And the Roshi's Zen that I worked with was very much in this embodying aspect. And that's part of why I write my blog, actually, is that I feel like I want to let the world know that there's this whole deep body aspect to the training, and that's a little lacking in the States from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a Russian student just send me a WhatsApp message yesterday saying, hey, I've been speaking to another meditation teacher, and he says that meditation's about getting out of your body and not identifying with the body and transcending the body. And I kind of said, well, that's not been my understanding or experience. But there's certainly that trend in some meditative traditions.
There really are. There really are. In a lot of traditions. And also there are some people who somehow still use it that way. And even though they've been training in for a long time, which is very strange for me. But yeah, and that's the stereotype about Zen too. You think, oh, that it's very heady, right? You get this feeling, oh, this person is this talking head at me, in their body. They're not in their bodies at all, So I'm arguing against that.
Yeah, that's what I hear, and I think I'm with you on that. And most listeners too. So just complete the story here then. So sort of where are you now? Where you're running this podcast, you're doing body work. Kind of fill us in the last few years.
I've actually just been a guest on a few podcasts. I am not running one. I would like to. That'd be fun.
Excuse me.
No, that's okay. But so I came back and I was looking for a way to offer way to communicate with people. Like I said, there's this whole internal process that begins in the training and begins to flourish. And then either you can become a teacher and you can share that as a Roshi in 30 years, you can become a Roshi and share that with students. And I was sort of tapped to be that. And then my karma changed. I came home, I had a family, and but I still wanted to share this really deep aspect of this beautiful aspect of life. I was trying to share that with people. And so I looked around, I looked at a lot of different modalities, and I looked at Alexander or, some of these wonderful Feldenkrais, some of these wonderful modalities. And but I went back I had done the Rolfing before. And so I went back and I remembered how open-minded these people were really thinking out of the box in this beautiful way. And so I decided on going into structural integration and having that be, my certificate for being able to communicate through touch with people.
And it sounds like it's almost like you were just looking for a method, like you need a method, as you say, to communicate through touch. Exactly.
Right. A medium to be able to start to communicate some of this internal world. What I feel is so that's what I'm trying to do with my work. Is I feel like there's if we can get in touch with what's really moving through us and harmonize with that, engage with that, then the body can begin to self-organize. The body can begin to fill itself up with life or whatever you want to call it. So that's mostly what I'm trying to do with my work.
Great. Makes sense. So I'm looking at some of these questions you sent me earlier, which is the listeners, what we often do is ask guests to actually send me some things they want to talk about. And I think we've talked about how embodiment relates to Rinzai Zen. Yeah. And one of the things you touched on there was it's kind of unstructured body embodiment works. So there are some non-directed body movement traditions, and you may be aware of some Asian ones that aren't so well known in the UK, for example. So maybe you could say a little bit about the sort of unstructured traditions and how they compared with more structured ones.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people in the monastery I lived in they were some pretty wild people. And a few of them were Butoh dancers. And I really love Butoh dancing. I'm a closet Butoh person. And so they're pretty wild. And for me, I'm interested in people breaking rules in terms of what they think of the body is. I love when we people have assumptions and then we challenge those. One type of work I sort of fell in love with recently is called Noguchi Taiso, and that's was developed by Michizo Noguchi, and he was this great, really interesting physical education teacher who, after World War II, he was devastated. You know, everything around him, literally, like the buildings were destroyed, and he said, well, what's real? What's actually real right now? And the only thing he could really see, which was real, was that his body was in gravity. And he decided to then explore that further and see what does that mean? And so what does that experientially mean? Not through an idea. So instead of him working from, top down, brain down on this, he said, my experience of the body, that's what's going to be my instrument for discovery. And so he decided to say, well, people think anatomy is this way, but perhaps it's not. And so he started thinking of the body as this sort of bag of water with bones in it. And what happens if I lift my arm? What is that? What happens? Not what someone's told me, but what happens? And I find that very interesting as a Zen person. You basically hit this bottom line all the time. You're hitting this place where you can't figure out anything anymore. It's gone. And so that I like this Noguchi style, and that he hit this real bottom line. He had to just start to discover things for himself. And so the whole practice is based on that, discovering movement from within rather than from an idea.
Great. And what a profound starting place. I'd like to open that out to listeners, like what's real, and kind of, Descartes came up with what I think, therefore I am, is the sort of his fundamental standing point, whereas kind of I feel would be another one.
Yeah.
And then, like, if we're talking about feeling, well, how do we know we're feeling? Is it, breath or gravity or any of these, just as I'm listening to you now and interviewing you, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm aware of that, like, pulls down today on me, and how do I want to sit in orientation to that as we talk?
Yeah.
And it's a hell of a profound starting point.
Yes. Yeah. And so then he dove into that deeper and deeper, and it gets pretty out there. It's pretty fun. He starts to think, well, our body is basically nature. Nature is, millions of years old. So we're dialoguing with, it's pretty out there. We're dialoguing with all of human history as we're trying to move our arm. I love that. That's very interesting to me. Yeah. So and again, I talked a little bit before about there's this non-directed that was developed by Marvin Sollitt, and that was basically this Rolfer osteopath. He decided to get rid of his table, get rid of all of his equipment, and have people just stand around and discover what happened, what would happen to their bodies if they gave up any idea of how it should be. And so in a way, they're similar to me, the Noguchi Taiso and the non-directed body movement. They're in the same kind of category in my mind.
And I've got another one here on the Yosemite. I don't know what it is, so I'm curious. It sounds like a Chinese one. Is it Zhan Zhuang? Yeah,
and that one's a little hard to pronounce. I usually say ZZ, right? But it's these static poses. So that's the sort of, those non-directed ones are sort of yin. This is sort of the yang. So that's like standing like a tree, right?
Uh-huh.
So you're standing there with your arms up and like you're holding a tree in front of you. And the reason I sent that was I find that in terms of my practice and some of what I've heard from a lot of us former Zen freaks, was that you can kind of just go a little too yin or a little too loose on some of this stuff, and it's nice to have this structure also. So I find that the Zhan Zhuang, you're standing there and you have to relax or you can't physically do it. It's really difficult. You're shaking. You start to get this sort of sewing machine leg. You'll start to shake, and that starts to relax your body from within. Okay, and that's very different than this. I'm going to stand there and let my body move around on its own. And so I find the two to be very complementary.
Yeah. We sometimes talk on EFC course that I run of form versus freedom practices, and I see there's different things that will come out of them and different traps for each. Like if you're just doing form practices, it gets a bit rigid. Maybe you're not fully expressing yourself, and then if you just do freedom practices, you're never learning to self-regulate, or there's other things that can come through in a different way. And I feel like people often pick the practices that fit their sort of neurotic and political tendencies, rather than the ones that are actually going to do them any good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And, for me, it's all this great love affair with experiencing this and just going deeper and deeper into it. And I really needed it. I really needed to start to work with this stuff. And I still work with it because it's just what I love and it's what I need. And it's also doing all that training. You kind of can't stop. If you begin to stop it, you start to your body has to keep going with these practices.
What do you mean you can't stop? That it's addictive, that you start to open something up? What do you mean?
I think people get unhealthy because you begin to have in this type of internal momentum. Okay, a lot of these practices, going back to what actually happens in like Zazen, in meditation, and we're sitting there and at first, and we're all sort of wondering what is everyone doing here, and we're thinking about our whole, we're thinking about Dogen, or we're thinking about whatever Buddhist saint we think about. And then over time we realize, there's something really profoundly deep moving through me all the time. And if I can begin to engage that more, it starts to grow, it starts to blossom. And that's what everybody's doing in a real Zendo. And so that process of this internal alchemy, whatever you want to call it, that kind of keeps going. It's a process that you gotta keep on. It isn't something that you can just put it in the corner, put it in the closet and walk away.
Yeah. Isn't that Japanese saying, better not start, but if started, better finish. And it's I definitely feel it myself when I haven't been practicing.
Yeah.
And, actually just last couple of days, I haven't done a whole lot of my normal embodied practice, and I'm really feeling it quite quickly in terms of my body, mind, well-being.
Yeah, right. And you've done some Zen and some Theravadan, is that right?
Yeah, most of my sitting has been in a kind of Theravadan type way, a couple of visits to Theravadan monasteries and, regular retreats for a little while, but a little bit of Zen in there too.
Yeah, cool. For me, I'm not here thinking that Zen is, the best. I think everyone has to find, and I always want to say that to people, there's a certain flavor that really kind of turns you on. And people have to discover that for themselves, whether it's Sufi, or whatever, I really believe that.
And so many flavors now.
Yeah. And again, I the reason I write this blog, is I'm trying to kind of say, there is this whole aspect. Like you said, there are so many things out there, and I want to just say, okay, but there's some really deep stuff there, and for people to discover if they want to, saying it's true, saying it's there.
Tell me about blogging. So what's that like as a practice for you? Because it's something I did years ago and haven't done for a while. I'm focusing more on the podcast these days. And, I've just looked at a couple of your blogs before I interviewed you, some good stuff on there, but how is that as a process?
Well, I think I started it to kind of work with my own, process of leaving that world and figuring out where that whole training world Zen, Zen's like any cult, it's hard to leave, So, I got, I was trying to figure out how to express myself, try to work on my own process. And then I started to see that trying to discover how to say something that's true was a practice for me to become clearer about what I felt was true. Okay.
Yes.
So that was really interesting. And then part of the blog is people will ask me questions, or I'll read something and I'll go, wait, that's not right. There's something else. And so I'll write about that. Or like I said, someone will ask me a question and then I'll kind of work it out in a little essay, and then I'll post that. Also, I think there are a lot of people who have done really deep practice and they aren't real sure how to embody it in their life. And so part of my blog is try to encourage people, inspire people to kind of keep going with their process. So yeah, the blogs, it's many things. And I might be starting to turn a little corner with it. I've said a lot on there, like you. I might be starting to be interested in other forms of artistic expression.
As you say, like, I find teaching something or writing about it absolutely very helpful for clarifying my own thoughts.
Yes.
This is my experience. Whenever I teach something, whenever I write something down, or if I decide I'm going to do a podcast episode of just me talking about meditation, for example, like I did a while back. And it's like, it really forces me to clarify it in a way which in my own head, I feel like I'm clear, but that articulating it really helps.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
I feel like now there's all these ways, not just that we can practice, but there's ways we can express it and explore it. Like I saw a friend in Vienna recently who's had a blog for a long time on wearable technology, and it's definitely been a way for him to explore, to build connections with a community. By doing the podcast, for example, I have conversations where I learn. That's a big motivator for me. And also I'm connecting with new people through it. So and I think this is underestimated because it wasn't part of traditional practice. Like if you think of the medieval Japan, someone just went to the monastery, right? Whereas now you can write a blog and maybe someone sends that to me and we end up podcasting. And maybe next time you're in England, you have dinner with me and my wife, and then maybe we do a training together. And that's a progression that's actually happened a few times, something like that. And that's not, I'm thinking out loud here, Corey, so I hope you don't mind, but that's not part of traditional practice, is it? This is this new element to practice. It's not just online, it's also what online affords us in terms of new connections and possibilities.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And I think in a way, I feel the deeper we go into our own process, the more creative and more, it's all a deeply creative process. And so I think a lot of us who go into practice in a profound way, we become artists. We become very creative people in the world, and we're not going to necessarily stay in old traditional clothing in a monastery, right? And so I find it very interesting the ways to connect with people, and I feel like the real deep practice creates these really incredible life artists, and that's what I'm kind of interested in, is that bridge mostly. That's a big problem for a lot of people, that bridge to really working creatively in the world with others and sharing some of this stuff. So it's not just weird bald people, over in Japan.
Let's talk more about that, because this is one of my obsessions, actually. I was just on Rafe Kelly's podcast being interviewed on, I developed this whole form of yoga, which is all about getting yoga off the mat. That was the specific and explicit singular emphasis of that way of doing yoga, because I said, listen, this is the most important part, right? Like, it's great to be flexible, it's great to be healthy, but I'm a pretty healthy guy, I don't get sick, so that's not really where I want to spend my time. And it just struck me that was the most important part. Like, how do we get this into life? So it isn't just, as you say, the weird bald guys or the weird flexible yoga girl or the big tough Aikido guy or, whatever it is. Like that strikes me as the single most important thing in practice for the vast majority of people.
Right. Yeah, I think there's this whole term, and forgive me for was talking about Japanese, but there's this whole term called kufu, and all of training is about this type of kufu, and that means creative problem solving. And so really, I think that this type of practice, even at yoga or Zen, or I think that it helps people to create this type of kufu in their lives. And so it's, while you're going deep into your process, you're also learning how to interact with everything in this creative way. That's what it's supposed to be about, right? It's supposed to be, how can I interact with reality in a creative way? And so I think coming off the mat and having that, the experience has to apply to life, or it's not that interesting really. And you see a lot of people who become institutionalized, or they become stuck in the form, and that's too bad.
So kufu means, I have some Japanese in me because I've done 20 years of Aikido. Yeah. This is actually a new word for me. So we've got keiko, kufu.
Kufu's like it's an old word, but I would be surprised if there's not kufu somehow embedded in some Aikido terms of freedom. I would be surprised.
Yeah, I'm just Googling it here now. Interesting. Okay. So it's KUFU.
Yep.
A really good way of doing something that you come up with after lots of thoughts.
I don't know about that. I think it's more like kufu is like you're fixing a wheelbarrow, and it's broken, and you somehow mend something to make it work spontaneously. That's like kufu. Right?
Oh, okay. Like kung fu as well seems to be like the well done element of kung fu.
Right.
You dedicated yourself to something and found a way of doing it well over time.
Yes, and back to koan training is there's this whole creative aspect to it, that if that aspect isn't there, then it's just old stories, old dead stories.
Yeah.
So I love this idea that the training is about realizing a way to engage with reality in this creative, beautiful way.
And do you think it's possible to sort of miss those lessons though? Because, I see people that do martial art or yoga for a long time, they get very good at the form, but they're not necessarily seeing it as a way to learn about life. Like, another way of asking that question would be like, how do we maximize that if that's the vital bit?
I see that you really see that in a lot of people who do deep practice, that they have not done that. And I think that you have to come in with this really honest place about you, and I think this training is an opportunity to explore. It's a canvas to explore all of that. That's what it really is. It's this open field to begin to explore. And if you're looking at it as, I'm going to just follow this, I do believe that the form is important, but if you have to have freedom within the form, and that's very, very important to work with this creative way of applying it to life. So you see a lot of people who do not do that, and it's very strange.
Mm-hmm. So what helps people do that more? Like, if you're teaching any art, a lot of teachers out here listening to this podcast of different embodied practices, like, how can they encourage that?
Yeah, I think that there's this whole curiosity aspect. There's this whole honest aspect. And, I think that people have to really be brave in their practice and be able to honestly explore it. I'm not sure. You tell me.
Well, I've got my own ideas on it, but I think first of all, just having that frame and that intention is pretty helpful.
Yes.
And the thing I think sometimes missing from Asian arts is a little bit of processing or analysis. Sometimes for me, just like, I remember that walk back from Aikido class with my friend, and I noticed this happening today, and I do that in my life, and oh shit, there's like an insight that you don't really have the space for in the sort of fast-paced class. Like, that's certainly one thing that I found very useful.
Yeah.
And then there's the sort of little micro skills that can be transferred, right? Like so there's a sort of, I think there's an insight model and a skills-based model, and they're both pretty helpful for that.
Yeah, and I feel like the whole thing has to be something you're very inspired about. You have to be fascinated in it. I mean, we always say that about it. You have to fall in love with training, fall in love with your process. And I think when you do that, doors really start to open. They really start to, in this beautiful way. And I think there's also a real rebelliousness that I really experience in training as a key factor for people really transforming. So the people who are doing the form kind of too well, or either they wouldn't stay because they were too good at it, or never grew. So the people who were, screwed up, or us jumping over the wall and going out to, at night, going to drink beer or something, the kind of wild mentality, you need that to be able to break through perceived notions. And so that wild curiosity I think it's a huge part of what kind of knocks down those walls.
Yeah, I noticed I had some Japanese friends I'd study Aikido with, and often they got very good at learning the form very quickly because they were good copiers, they were sort of obedient students. Yeah. And I noticed those students in some ways didn't really have a depth of understanding with it or a creativity with it. Yeah. It was like they just got good at sort of copying it. And the ones that were sort of struggling with it, asking difficult questions, trying to do things their own way, like they kind of ended up owning it at a much deeper level.
Yes. And so this gets back to, for me, I feel like the process has to be one where you start to get this wholesale experience of truth. It has to be that we have a connection with what's real or what's true for ourselves. And then we're not looking outwardly for that learning. And I think within the form, within a very rigid form like Zen, there's all this opportunity to discover this internal process, which I feel like to say it's wholesale. So I've got my connection with this process, and so it doesn't matter what others are doing or what they think how it should be. We start to get our own connection, and then that starts to have its own life, and those people really transform.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
What do you think is kind of most different in an American context from a Japanese context then? Because it's like some of us have taken on these arts from other cultures, whether it's Japan or India or whatever. And now we're in a real different world.
Well, I think that speaking about Zen first, I think that we've got a long way to go to deeply embody the depth and what we call essence of the training. So there are a lot of people who have passed some koans, they've become teachers, and they're very smart, and they're great. They're great teachers, I think. But I think that the deep essence of that hasn't quite translated that much to the States yet, and maybe to Britain, I'm not sure. But there are a few. Like there's a guy I really like, I really have like kind of high hopes for. His name's Butoh Moore, and he's an Aikido guy. And
he's a devastating Aikido guy.
You know him? Do you know Butoh Moore?
I've met him years ago in Chicago, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, and he's really coming along.
Aikido.
He's got a Rinzai monastery, and I think that style is also this very deeply embodied kind of training. So I have high hopes for Butoh. I think you should interview him if you want. I think he's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
And as far as the other, I think that people. I have a friend, for instance, he's a martial artist and in Japan, and he would come train with the Roshi for every O session, every week-long retreat for 25 years. And you see the dedication that this person has put into their art. And I'm seeing a real martial arts master in that way, you see, oh, this is so profound. It's so deep, and it's huge. And I think that the States, again, and in the West in general, I think that we just kind of have, I think we have a few centuries before it's really rooted here.
And it also strikes me it's difficult to be a kind of purist today, you know, to be conservative in the positive sense of conserving something. There's just so much cool shit out there.
Yeah.
And there's just so many shiny things and so many new fun things. And
yeah,
you know, I'm a festival called Butoh this summer, and there'll be like 300 activities on offer, you know?
Yes.
And to actually commit to a lineage and really go into it deeply to do that, you know, like the guys I met in Hombu Dojo in Japan who've been coming to early morning class for the last 40 years, you know? Yeah. And it's really tricky in the modern world, both with our busyness and with all the options.
I think so too. And also, I think the Westerners, I think we don't really understand this Confucian idea of duty. And so a lot of these ideas, like in Zen or say Aikido, is that you do this one thing every day for your whole life, and maybe you never move. And that's a Confucian ideal, is that you're performing this type of duty, and we just don't understand that. Like it can't even get in there for us. You know, we hardly any of us live where we grew up. You know, stuff like that. You know, so yeah, I totally agree. But for me, you know, again, with this whole idea, I'm trying to kind of bridge this. I feel like that's what we've got to do, is we've got to bring, with our kufu, we've got to bring this essence into a way that, you know, Westerners can all somehow benefit from it. I have a great urge to kind of share some of the gifts I received from doing that work. And anyway, I think that's the idea, is we have to share that with people.
So what do you want to do before you die? What is your sort of sense of the work you're really here to do?
Yeah, I'd like to just pass on this essence that there's this huge mind, and that we can move around with that, and we can heal, and that there's something beautiful happening. And I'd like to be some kind of benefit to, you know, a few people, because, you know, I'm in a position where I'm not a Roshi, where I'm benefiting, you know, thousands. So just to help some people to like me, who are really struggling, and then they saw something, other possibility, and so that's really big for me. Share something beautiful, share this possibility that people can really transform. They can be more in harmony with everything. How about you?
I've got mine, but I'll take a day off answering that one if you don't mind.
Good.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that, you know, for me, certainly this podcast, the conferences and the other things I do, I'd love to have more embodiment in the world and more information about this work out there.
Wow.
You know, the fact that this is free of charge going out to thousands and thousands of people makes me very happy that we're able to, you know, I think episode 176 we just released yesterday.
Yeah.
Like, that's an education. If someone that's sitting there, you know, maybe is poor, maybe doesn't have access, maybe single mum who can't leave the house so easily or whatever, you know, can't get childcare, like that's an education if people want it. And that certainly feels like one reason I'm here. Yes. To put that out there. I just feel very grateful we have the technology to do that, you know, very kind of cheaply, which is just so cool.
Yes.
Feels like we're moving to sort of a natural close, maybe a bit earlier than expected, but I kind of feel like there's a natural rhythm sometimes these interviews, and it's better to go with that.
Yeah. Okay.
So a couple of ththings to finish. Is there anything you kind of haven't talked about that you'd like to chat about? We have time.
No. No, I don't think so.
Okay, so a couple of things. Where can people find out more about you? We should give them the URL of your blog if they're. Obviously, I'll put the link on our site, but often people are not seeing those.
Yeah, I have my business site is CoreyHessBodyTherapy.com, and But my blog is separate from that, and that's zenembodiment.com. And please ask questions. If you have a question on there or you have a comment, please comment. I'm doing this for free, so it's mostly just for people to get something out of it or to ask a question. That's why I'm doing it.
Great. I've certainly found you accessible, and when someone suggested you and I reached out to you, it was dead easy. So I just encourage other people to do that. Yeah. Actually, it's funny, sometimes people think we're inaccessible if we're on the internet, but it's like if someone sends me a little Facebook message or they ask a question on the Facebook group, I'll always answer it, as long as they haven't written a huge essay I have to read. I'm quite happy to. Yes. So I'm guessing you're the same.
Yes, I am. And again, thanks for taking the time with me, and I really appreciate being on your podcast. There's a lot of big names on here, so thanks.
It's interesting people. That's who I want to get on, and you're certainly that. So, closing message about the body, Corey. Do you have a closing message about the body for listeners?
Well, I would say taking some time every day to stop and discover what's really going on internally without any idea, without any technique. See what's really happening. It may be something you completely don't understand, and start to allow that process to happen and to move through you and to bloom. That's my hope, is that people will start to discover that.
Nice. I like that a lot. This has felt like a sort of amiable jaunt and a nice kind of way to begin to get to know each other, Corey. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thanks so much. And great. Thank you.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. Most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on the embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.